Here is what you need to know before this story begins. Marcus Hale, Stanford MBA, venture capital golden boy. The kind of man who wore bespoke Tom Ford suits to casual dinners and made sure everyone in the room noticed, spent 14 months orchestrating the most meticulous financial divorce he believed he had ever pulled off. He hired 3 separate attorneys. He moved assets offshore. He convinced a judge, a courtroom, and an entire Manhattan social circle that his wife, Elena Vasquez Hale, was walking away from their 8-year marriage with nothing more than a modest settlement, a Brooklyn apartment with a leaking radiator, and a bruised reputation. He toasted with Cristal in the Hamptons the night the divorce was finalized. He texted her at 2:07 in the morning, 3 words, no punctuation, the kind of casual cruelty that only a man who believes he has already won can deliver, and those 3 words were, enjoy being broke. What Marcus Hale did not know, what he could not have known because Elena had spent 3 years making sure of it, was that she had inherited, through a sealed and confidential trust established by her late grandmother Dolores Vasquez in 2019, a controlling stake in Maison Dolores, a boutique fashion empire with flagship stores on Fifth Avenue, Rodeo Drive, and the Champs-Élysées, with a net valuation at the time of the divorce of $340 million. He divorced a woman he thought was broke. He had actually divorced the silent majority owner of one of the most quietly powerful luxury fashion houses in the Western Hemisphere. And when Elena's attorneys filed a single, devastating legal document, a post-divorce disclosure of previously undeclared marital assets cross-referenced with forensic accounting evidence of Marcus's own hidden offshore accounts, his entire financial architecture collapsed in 47 days. This is that story. If your husband spent 8 years making you feel small, spent 14 months hiding his money from the courts, and then texted you at 2 a.m. to mock you for being broke, would you let it go, or would you burn every single thing he built to the ground? Drop your answer in the comments right now. And before this story goes any further, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because this one does not end the way Marcus Hale expected it to end. Elena Vasquez grew up in a house that smelled like fresh-cut gardenias and old money, but not the kind of old money that announces itself. Her grandmother, Dolores Vasquez, had built Maison Dolores from a single couture atelier in Madrid in 1971, relocating to New York in 1988 when American appetite for European luxury was at its most voracious. By the time Elena was born, Maison Dolores had become the kind of label that did not advertise. It did not need to. It dressed senators' wives and film actresses and the kind of billionaire women who never appeared on Forbes lists because they preferred it that way. Dolores herself was a small, precise woman who wore her silver hair in a chignon and spoke 4 languages with equal authority, and she believed, with a ferocity that bordered on religious conviction, that wealth was a private matter and that a woman who revealed her full hand at the table deserved to lose. She raised Elena to believe the same thing. Elena studied art history at Columbia, not because she lacked ambition, but because Dolores told her that the people who understood beauty were the people who ultimately controlled it. She interned at Sotheby's at 22. She curated a small but critically respected gallery in Chelsea at 25. She was intelligent in the way that quiet people are intelligent, observationally, architecturally, building structures in her mind that other people did not see until they were already standing inside them. She was also, by any objective measure, stunning with the kind of dark-eyed, high-cheekboned beauty that made people assume she was decorative rather than dangerous. That assumption would cost Marcus Hale everything. She met him at a charity auction in 2014. He was 31, freshly minted from a successful exit at his first venture fund, and he moved through the room with the calibrated confidence of a man who had recently discovered that money made other people uncomfortable and had decided to use that discomfort as a weapon. He wore a Patek Philippe Nautilus on his left wrist and a practiced smile that suggested he found everything mildly amusing. He bid on a painting Elena had curated for the auction, outbid the previous bidder by a theatrical $40,000, and then leaned over to Elena and said, "I have no idea what I just bought, but I figured you could explain it to me over dinner." She should have recognized the pattern in that sentence. He bought something he did not understand and immediately recruited someone else to give it meaning. That was Marcus Hale in a single gesture. But she was 28 and he was charming, and the painting he had bought was genuinely extraordinary. A Basquiat study that she had spent 3 months sourcing, and there was something intoxicating about a man who moved that fast and that fearlessly through a room. They were engaged within 8 months. Dolores met him twice before the wedding and said nothing critical, which Elena later understood was the most damning verdict her grandmother was capable of delivering. Dolores had opinions about everything. Her silence about Marcus was not neutrality. It was a held breath. The wedding was at a vineyard in Sonoma. 230 guests. Elena wore a custom Maison Dolores gown. Ivory silk charmeuse with hand-embroidered gold thread along the bodice, though she did not mention at the time that the label was her family's. Marcus assumed she had borrowed it through a connection. He did not ask. He rarely asked about Elena's family business in any depth, because asking would have required genuine curiosity, and genuine curiosity about other people was not a muscle Marcus had developed. The first years were functional. Marcus's fund, Hale Capital, was generating strong returns, and he was riding the momentum of 2 successful tech exits. They lived in a Park Avenue co-op that he owned before the marriage, 1,100 square feet of aggressively minimalist design with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the skyline that visitors always commented on. Elena continued her gallery work, took on consulting projects for auction houses, and visited Dolores every Sunday for lunch at the townhouse on East 70th Street where her grandmother had lived since 1992. Marcus came to those lunches perhaps 4 times in 8 years. The first time Elena noticed that something was genuinely wrong in her marriage was not during a fight. It was during a dinner party at their apartment in the spring of 2018. Marcus had invited 6 couples, all from his professional circle, venture capitalists and hedge fund managers and their respective wives or girlfriends, and somewhere between the second and third course one of his partners, a man named Derek Cho, asked Elena what she did. Elena began to describe her current consulting work, a provenance research project for a major auction house involving 3 disputed Klimt paintings, which was legitimately fascinating and required a level of forensic art historical knowledge that very few people possessed. She had been speaking for perhaps 90 seconds when Marcus interrupted her. "She keeps herself busy," he said, smiling at Derek, and then steered the conversation toward a deal his fund was closing in Austin. The table followed him, because tables always followed Marcus, and Elena sat with her wine glass and finished her sentence in her head and said nothing. She kept herself busy. 8 years of graduate-level expertise in one of the most specialized fields in the art world, reduced to a placeholder. She kept herself busy, like a restless child, like a woman whose purpose was to be present and pleasant, and not to consume too much conversational oxygen. She mentioned it to him later that night. He told her she was being sensitive. She mentioned it again 2 weeks later. He told her she had a habit of making small things larger than they were. By the 3rd time she tried to discuss it, she had already begun to understand that Marcus did not engage with criticisms of Marcus. He deflected, diminished, and then moved forward as though the conversation had not occurred. It was not dramatic. There was no shouting. It was something quieter and more corrosive, a systematic refusal to take her seriously that operated below the threshold of obvious abuse, so subtle that Elena sometimes wondered if she was imagining it. She was not imagining it. The micro-abuses accumulated the way water damage accumulates, slowly and then suddenly. He introduced her at industry events as "my wife Elena," with no further detail, as though her professional identity was an embarrassing footnote. He made financial decisions about their shared life, renovations, vacations, investments, without consulting her, and then expressed mild surprise when she had opinions. He had a habit, at dinner parties, of telling stories from their relationship in which Elena was the comic foil, the woman who had misread a social situation or said the wrong thing, always delivered with affectionate condescension, always landing with a laugh, always leaving Elena to smile along with a room that was laughing at her. He monitored her spending with an attention he never applied to his own, questioned her about lunches with friends, suggested at various points that her gallery consulting was more hobby than career. And through all of it, he maintained such a consistent surface of charm and reasonableness that Elena found herself, on more than one occasion, apologizing for reactions that were entirely justified. Dolores watched all of this without comment. But in November of 2019, 2 weeks before she was diagnosed with a pancreatic cancer that would kill her in 4 months, she called Elena to the townhouse on a Tuesday afternoon and sat her down at the kitchen table where Elena had eaten Sunday lunches since she was 6 years old, and she placed a small brass key on the table between them. The key had a diamond cut tag attached to it, no larger than a thumbnail, engraved with a single number, a safety deposit box number at a private banking institution in Midtown. "This," Dolores said in the precise, accented English she had never entirely lost. Is yours. Not yours and his. Yours. Do you understand the difference? Elena picked up the key. Yes, abuela. I have spent 40 years building something, Dolores said. I have spent 40 years making sure it belongs to the right people. You are the right people. He is not. She did not say Marcus's name. She never said Marcus's name in that conversation. The trust is sealed. Confidential. Your attorneys know. His attorneys will never know unless you tell them, and you will not tell them. She paused. Not yet. Elena did not ask what not yet meant. She understood that her grandmother was giving her something more than an inheritance. She was giving her a trapdoor. She was saying, I see what is happening to you, and I am making sure that when you are ready to leave, you will be able to leave whole. Dolores Vasquez died in March of 2020. Elena wore black for 6 months not because society expected it, but because her grief was that large and she had no interest in minimizing it to make other people comfortable. Marcus attended the funeral and spent most of the reception talking to Dolores's estate attorneys about the publicly known assets of the Vasquez family, because Marcus Hale's relationship with loss was primarily transactional. He expressed condolences that were syntactically correct and emotionally empty, and he put his arm around Elena in front of people and did not ask her in private how she was doing. The confidential trust transferred to Elena 6 weeks after Dolores's death. The sealed filing ensured it was not part of any public record. Her personal attorney, a woman named Constance Park who had worked with the Vasquez family for 19 years, and who regarded Marcus with the same quiet disdain that Dolores had, handled every detail with the discretion of a surgeon. Elena became, on paper, the majority stakeholder in Maison Dolores International LLC, a company that controlled a fashion empire, a portfolio of commercial real estate across 3 continents, and a collection of fine art valued independently at $62 million. She became these things privately, quietly, and completely. She told Marcus nothing. She told Marcus nothing because her grandmother had told her not to, and because some part of her, the part that had been sitting at dinner tables listening to a room laugh at her for 4 years, understood that the day would come when that silence would matter. The marriage deteriorated steadily through 2020 and 2021. The pandemic years were not kind to pretense. Forced into the same apartment for months at a time, with no dinner parties to perform at and no social obligations to structure his charm around, Marcus became something more purely himself, impatient, dismissive, occasionally contemptuous, a man who had confused the performance of a good husband with actually being one and now found the performance unnecessary. He worked constantly, which was partly ambition and partly avoidance. He spoke to Elena with the efficient brevity of someone managing an inconvenient logistical problem. He forgot her birthday in 2021 and remembered 11 days later, and bought her a diamond bracelet that she recognized from a store he passed every morning on his way to his office, selected in approximately 4 minutes, wrapped by someone else. She thanked him for it with a smile that did not reach her eyes. In January of 2022, she found a text message on his phone. She had not been looking for it. His phone had buzzed on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower and she had glanced over reflexively, the way people do, and the preview was visible without unlocking it. The name in the contact was a woman's first name, a name Elena did not recognize, and the message was a single line that contained the particular specificity of intimacy. She stood at the kitchen counter for a long time with her coffee going cold in her hand. When Marcus came out of the shower, she was sitting at the breakfast bar reading the news on her laptop, and her face showed him nothing. Nothing at all. Because Elena Vasquez Hale had spent 8 years in a marriage that had trained her, inadvertently but very effectively, to keep her real self behind glass. And in this moment, that training became her greatest weapon. She made an appointment with Constance Park the following Monday morning. "Tell me exactly what I have," Elena said, sitting across from Constance in her Lexington Avenue office, in one of those spare, hushed spaces that very expensive lawyers favor because silence reads as competence. "And tell me how to protect it." Constance told her. The trust was airtight. The controlling stake in Maison Dolores had been structured, through 3 layers of holding entities, in a way that was legally defensible as premarital inheritance. The sealed nature of the confidential filing meant that it had never appeared in any disclosure that Marcus or his attorneys would have access to without court intervention. Constance had also, over the preceding 2 years, retained a forensic accountant named Gerald Osei, who had been quietly documenting the financial structure of Hale Capital. Not because Elena had instructed him to find wrongdoing, but because Dolores Vasquez had told Constance long before her death that a woman going into a marriage with a man like Marcus should have someone watching the books. Gerald had been watching the books for 2 years. What he had found was illuminating. Marcus Hale had been systematically underreporting the performance of Hale Capital's flagship fund to minimize its assessed value in the event of a divorce. He had moved approximately $12 million through a series of offshore entities in the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg that were nominally owned by a consulting company registered in Delaware that listed, as its sole officer, a man who was, upon investigation, Marcus's college roommate and functionally a proxy. He had also taken out 3 separate lines of personal credit against the Park Avenue Co-op, which was now mortgaged to 70% of its value despite Marcus's public posture of financial invincibility, and had used those funds to finance a lifestyle that exceeded even Hale Capital's considerable returns. Marcus Hale, beneath the Patek Philippe and the Hamptons weekends and the bespoke suits, was carrying $8 million in personal debt that he had hidden from virtually everyone, including his own partners. Elena sat with this information for 10 days. She did not cry. She had cried in the early weeks after finding the text, privately, in the bathroom of their apartment with the shower running, the way women in bad marriages learn to grieve without leaving evidence. But by the time she sat in Constance's office and received the full financial picture, the grief had completed its transformation. It had become something colder and more precise. It had become a plan. She filed for divorce in March of 2022. She filed on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, not infidelity, because she was not interested in the spectacle of proving the affair. She was interested in the financial settlement. Marcus, characteristically, received the filing with a performance of wounded dignity followed immediately by aggressive legal maneuvering. He retained Hamilton Briggs, the most aggressive matrimonial attorney in New York, a man whose reputation rested on his ability to reduce wives' settlements to the legally defensible minimum. He also immediately began accelerating the concealment of assets, an action that Gerald Osei documented in real time with the calm satisfaction of a man watching a prediction come true. What Marcus did not understand and what his attorneys did not understand because they did not know about Constance Park or Gerald Osei or the sealed trust or the 14 months of forensic documentation was that Elena was not trying to win the divorce. She was trying to let Marcus believe he had won it. There is a specific and devastating difference between those two things, and the entire strategy turned on Marcus's absolute conviction that he was the smartest person in any negotiation he entered. He was, in fact, negotiating with a woman who held $340 million in assets he had never seen and never suspected. The divorce proceedings lasted 8 months. Marcus's legal team pushed aggressively on the valuation of her gallery consulting income, which was modest, and on the lack of any significant financial assets in her name, which was accurate in the narrowest technical sense. They proposed a settlement that included the modest Brooklyn apartment, a cash payment of $400,000, and spousal support for 3 years. It was, by any reasonable standard, an insult. It was the settlement you offered someone you believed had no leverage and no alternatives. Elena, on the instruction of Constance Park, accepted it. She accepted it because accepting it served 2 purposes. First, it finalized the divorce in a way that officially closed the record of marital assets as Marcus had declared them, which meant that his hidden offshore accounts and his underreported fund valuations were now part of a finalized legal record that could be formally challenged. Second, it gave Marcus exactly the victory he wanted, which meant he would stop looking. A man who believes he has won stops being careful. He celebrates. He becomes careless. He texts his ex-wife at 2 a.m. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in November. By Friday afternoon, Marcus had already given an interview, off the record, to a financial gossip columnist he knew from the industry circuit, suggesting that the settlement had been his own generous decision, that Elena had been grateful, that the whole thing had been remarkably civilized. The story ran the following week, framed exactly as Marcus had intended, a narrative in which he was the magnanimous victor and Elena was the quietly retreating former wife with her $400,000 and her leaking radiator. That Saturday, Marcus flew to the Hamptons with a woman named Sasha, 29 years old, formerly a digital marketing director at a tech startup that Hale Capital had funded, currently presenting herself as a lifestyle influencer with 40,000 Instagram followers and an apparently unlimited tolerance for men who describe themselves as visionaries. They stayed at a house Marcus had rented for the weekend, drank expensive wine on the deck, and Marcus posted a photograph to his own Instagram account, rare for him, a shot of the ocean at sunset, captioned simply, "New chapter." It was liked within 6 hours by 43 people who considered themselves his friends. Elena saw the photograph. She was sitting in the Brooklyn apartment, which genuinely did have a leaking radiator, wrapped in a cashmere blanket that had belonged to her grandmother, eating takeout Thai food, and she looked at the photograph for exactly 4 seconds before putting her phone face down on the cushion beside her. She was not devastated. She had passed through devastation months ago. She was in the final stages of preparation. She had spent the preceding 3 months, while the divorce was finalizing, working with Constance and Gerald and a third attorney, a forensic financial litigator named Raymond Choi who specialized in post-divorce asset disclosure cases, on a document. The document was a formal legal filing under New York's post-judgment disclosure rules, which allow for the reopening of financial settlements when evidence of fraud or concealment of assets can be demonstrated. The filing attached as exhibits 14 months of forensic accounting documentation, bank records from the Cayman and Luxembourg entities, the Delaware consulting company registration showing Marcus's college roommate as sole officer, 3 independent valuations of Hale Capital's flagship fund that contradicted the valuations Marcus's team had presented to the court, and a sworn affidavit from Gerald Osei detailing the methodology and findings of his investigation. The document was 47 pages long. Raymond Choi described it as the most comprehensively documented post-divorce fraud filing he had seen in 22 years of practice. It was ready to file the moment the divorce was finalized. Elena waited 2 weeks. She waited because she wanted Marcus to feel the full weight of his victory first. She wanted him to post the Instagram photograph and give the off-the-record interview and fly to the Hamptons and drink his Cristal and feel, completely and without reservation, that he had won. She wanted the victory to be total so that what came next would be a fall from the highest possible point. At 2:07 a.m. on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, her phone lit up with a text from Marcus's number. "Enjoy being broke." She looked at it for a long time. She thought about the dinner party in 2018 and the phrase, "She keeps herself busy." She thought about the birthday bracelet selected in 4 minutes. She thought about 8 years of being made to feel like a footnote in the story of someone else's life. She thought about Dolores at the kitchen table with the small brass key and the diamond cut tag and the word "not yet." She picked up the phone. She opened a different application. She accessed the safety deposit box registry at the private banking institution in Midtown where her grandmother had stored the original trust documents, the founding documents of Maison Dolores, and a letter written in Elena Vasquez's precise handwriting that Elena had read only once, on the day she opened the box, a letter that said in its final paragraph, "You were always the Empire, Michigan Amour. He was always the distraction." She set the phone down. She went to sleep. At 9:03 a.m. on Monday morning, Raymond Choi filed the 47-page document with the New York County Supreme Court. The financial press picked up the public filing by early afternoon. By 4 p.m., a reporter from the Wall Street Journal's market desk had called Hale Capital's communications number for comment. By 6 p.m., 2 of Marcus's limited partners, institutional investors whose combined capital in the fund represented approximately 60% of its assets under management, had called Marcus directly, their voices carrying the specific register of wealthy men who are very calm and very angry at the same time. Marcus did not call Elena, but his attorney Hamilton Briggs called Constance Park at 7:15 p.m. "This is aggressive," Briggs said. "It is thorough," Constance said. "There is a difference. My client would like to discuss a resolution." "My client," Constance said, "is no longer interested in discussions with your client. She is interested in the court process. I suggest you advise him to cooperate fully with the court-appointed forensic accountant, because the alternative is a criminal referral to the Southern District, and Raymond Choi has a very good relationship with the U.S. Attorney's Office." The call lasted 9 minutes. Constance relayed it to Elena word for word. Elena listened, thanked her, and went back to the inventory she was reviewing for Maison Dolores' spring collection, which was staging its New York presentation in 6 weeks and which, as of that month, Elena had officially assumed the active role of creative director and majority stakeholder, a role that had been announced with considerable fanfare in Women's Wear Daily and Vogue Business in the same week that Raymond Choi filed the 47 pages with the court. The announcement was the second detonation, because the fashion world knew what Maison Dolores was. The financial world, upon reading the coverage, very quickly understood what Maison Dolores was worth. And every person in Marcus Hale's professional and social circle, who had read the off-the-record story about the civilized divorce and the grateful ex-wife with her $400,000 now had to recalculate everything they thought they knew about who had actually had power in that marriage. The recalculation was not comfortable for Marcus. Within 10 days of the WWD announcement, 3 things happened in rapid succession. First, the 2 limited partners who had called Marcus on the day of the filing formally submitted redemption requests, triggering a liquidity event that Hale Capital's fund structure was not positioned to absorb without selling positions at a loss. Second, a 4th limited partner, a family office that had been considering a significant new allocation to Hale Capital's next fund, quietly withdrew from the process. Third, a journalist at a financial news outlet who had been investigating offshore fund structures in the venture capital space called Hale Capital's registered agent in the Cayman Islands, and the registered agent, not understanding the delicacy of the situation, confirmed the existence of the Luxembourg entity. The story ran 11 days after the filing. It was careful, legalistic, full of the qualifications that responsible financial journalism requires, but its architecture was clear to anyone reading it. Marcus Hale had used offshore structures to conceal fund assets during divorce proceedings, and those structures were now the subject of a court-ordered forensic investigation. Marcus's partners called an emergency meeting of the fund's advisory board. Elena knew about the advisory board meeting because one of the members was a woman named Patricia Sue, a venture partner who had known Elena through the gallery world for a decade and who called her the night before the meeting not to share information but simply to say, in a voice that was warm and precisely calibrated, "I just wanted you to know that the people who matter have always known who you were." Elena thanked her and meant it. The advisory board meeting lasted 4 hours. Marcus emerged from it without his management role. He was asked to step back from day-to-day operations pending the outcome of the court investigation. His co-founder, a man named Trevor Walsh who had joined Hale Capital 3 years earlier, and who had spent those 3 years becoming quietly uncomfortable with Marcus's methods, was elevated to acting managing partner. Trevor issued a statement expressing the firm's full cooperation with the court process and its commitment to transparency with its limited partners. Marcus's name appeared nowhere in the statement. The Hamptons house rental was not renewed. The photograph of the ocean sunset remained on Instagram for 6 more days before Marcus deleted it, which the internet noticed, because the internet always notices when powerful men quietly remove the evidence of their celebrations. Sasha, the former digital marketing director and aspirational lifestyle influencer, posted nothing for 2 weeks and then posted a photograph of herself at a yoga retreat in Tulum with a caption about realigning with my highest self, which those who were paying attention read as a breakup announcement. She followed Marcus's Instagram account for 3 more months and then unfollowed it on a Tuesday with the quiet efficiency of someone closing a browser tab. The spring Maison Dolores presentation happened 6 weeks after the filing, at a space Elena had chosen in the meatpacking district, a former warehouse converted into something that felt like a cathedral of light, all white walls and strategic flooding, with a runway that ran the full length of the building. Elena wore a custom piece from the collection, a fluid column of midnight blue silk crepe with architectural shoulder construction that had been her own design in collaboration with Maison Dolores's head atelier, and she sat in the front row beside Patricia Sue and Constance Park and a senior editor from American Vogue who had flown in specifically because the industry had been waiting for years to see what Elena Vasquez would do when she finally stepped out from behind the glass. The collection received a standing ovation. The Vogue coverage ran the following week under the headline, "The Quiet Billionaire, Elena Vasquez and the Fashion Empire She Was Hiding in Plain Sight." The article was 7,000 words long and it was, Elena thought, reasonably accurate, which was more than she had expected from a profile piece. Marcus Hale read the article. She knew he read it because Constance's assistant flagged a public court filing 3 days later, in which Marcus's attorneys attempted to reopen the asset disclosure question. arguing that the Maison Dolores Trust constituted a marital asset that should have been disclosed during proceedings. Raymond Choi filed a response within 48 hours that was 41 pages long and contained the word frivolous 11 times and a formal request for sanctions against Marcus's legal team for filing a motion without factual basis. The motion was denied. The sanctions request was granted. Hamilton Briggs withdrew from the case shortly afterward, citing a conflict of interest that everyone in the New York matrimonial bar understood meant he did not want his name attached to what was coming. Marcus's new attorney was less experienced and considerably less expensive, which told its own story. The court-ordered forensic accountant completed her investigation in 90 days. Her report confirmed Gerald Osei's findings in full and added 3 additional offshore entities that Gerald had not identified, bringing the total concealed assets to approximately $15 million. The report was forwarded to the Southern District of New York, where an assistant U.S. attorney whose name appeared in the financial press with some regularity opened a preliminary inquiry. The preliminary inquiry became an investigation. The investigation lasted 8 months. Elena was not a party to it except as a witness in the civil proceeding, and she gave her testimony in a conference room on a Wednesday afternoon in a voice that was measured and precise and entirely free of either satisfaction or distress, because she had learned from her grandmother that the appropriate emotion for justice is not triumph. It is simply completion. Marcus Hale was indicted on 3 counts of fraud and 2 counts of making false statements in a legal proceeding. The indictment was unsealed on a Tuesday morning, and the news moved through the venture capital community with the velocity of things that people had expected and hoped would not happen. His bail was set at $2 million. The Park Avenue Co-op, which was mortgaged to 70% of its value and against which Marcus had taken the personal credit lines, was seized by the primary lender within 60 days of the indictment as Marcus's ability to service the debt evaporated along with his income. He moved temporarily into a rental in Hoboken, New Jersey. The rent was $2,800 a month, which his depleted personal accounts could cover for perhaps 4 months. Trevor Walsh, now operating Hale Capital without its founder, reached a separate civil settlement with the fund's limited partners that involved the dissolution of the offshore entities and the return of concealed assets. The fund survived in a reduced form under Trevor's management, rebranded with a new name, with Marcus's founding partnership stake diluted to 0 as a condition of the settlement. He received nothing from the entity he had built, because the legal costs and the civil settlements consumed the value of his stake entirely. His college roommate, the sole officer of the Delaware Consulting Company, cooperated with federal investigators. He did so quickly and completely, which is what people do when they are facing conspiracy charges and their old friends' attorneys are no longer returning calls. The criminal trial lasted 11 days. Marcus's defense was that the offshore structures had been established for legitimate tax purposes and that any resemblance to asset concealment was coincidental, an argument that the forensic accountant's 90-page report made very difficult to sustain and that the jury, after 4 hours of deliberation, did not find persuasive. He was convicted on 2 of the 3 fraud counts and 1 of the false statement counts. He was sentenced to 22 months in a federal facility in New Jersey. The sentencing happened on a gray October morning. Elena was not in the courtroom. She was in Paris, sitting in on the final fittings for Maison Dolores's Paris Fashion Week presentation, which was being held that year at a private hotel particulier in the 8th arrondissement that the label had recently acquired as its European headquarters. She heard about the sentence from Constance, who texted her a single line at 3 p.m. Paris time. 22 months. Federal facility. Sentence begins in 30 days. Elena read the text. She was holding a cup of café au lait in a sunlit room hung with silk samples in 12 shades of ivory, and outside the window the Seine was moving at its usual unhurried pace, and the city smelled like autumn and stone and the very particular kind of beauty that persists regardless of what is happening to anyone in particular. She typed back, "Thank you, Constance." She set the phone on the fitting table. She turned back to the silk samples. She selected the one that was closest to the color of the light in the room, which was the color of something beginning rather than ending, and she said to the head atelier, whose name was Francois and who had worked for Maison Dolores for 17 years and who regarded Elena with the devotional precision of a craftsman who has finally found a patron who understands his work, "This one." For the opening look. Francois nodded. He had, she thought, been waiting for her to arrive at that choice. Some things she was learning were simply a matter of patience, of knowing what you had and waiting for exactly the right moment to show it. Her grandmother had known that. Dolores Vasquez, who had built an empire from a single atelier in Madrid and kept it private for 50 years because she understood that the most powerful things in the world are the things that nobody knows you have until the moment you choose to reveal them. Elena Vasquez was no longer hiding. The sealed trust was public record now. The Vogue profile had 12 million reads across platforms. Women's Wear Daily had named her to their annual power list. The Paris presentation sold out its front row within 48 hours of invitations going out. She was building something in her grandmother's house and in her grandmother's language, the language of quality and patience and the kind of beauty that does not apologize for itself. Marcus Hale reported to the federal facility on a Monday morning in November. He was 43 years old. He wore a gray suit that had once been expensive and had not been cleaned recently enough, and he carried a single bag. There was no photograph. Nobody posted about it. The people who had liked his ocean sunset picture had quietly unfollowed him in the intervening months, the way people do when someone stops being useful. The Hoboken rental was given up. His remaining personal assets after legal fees and settlement costs amounted to a checking account with $11,000 and a storage unit in Queens containing furniture from the Park Avenue Co-op that no one had wanted to buy. The Park Avenue Co-op itself was sold at auction for less than its mortgage value. The bank absorbed the loss. The buyer was a young couple from Boston who were, by all reports, delighted with the view. Sasha, the aspirational lifestyle influencer, had relocated to Austin and was dating a man who worked in renewable energy, and who, by all available evidence, was considerably more straightforward than his predecessor. She had 47,000 Instagram followers now, the gain attributable to a sponsored post about a collagen supplement that had performed unusually well, and she posted about wellness and travel with the determined cheerfulness of someone who has learned a lesson and would prefer not to discuss what lesson it was. The three attorneys who had worked for Marcus during the divorce proceedings had all, in the months following the indictment, made various adjustments to their professional associations that created distance between their names and his. Hamilton Briggs had joined a new firm and did not list the Hale divorce among his notable representations. Elena Vasquez Hale, who had legally restored her name to Elena Vasquez on the day the divorce was finalized, lived in an apartment on the Upper West Side that she had purchased in cash the month after the Vogue profile ran. It was 3,000 square feet on the 14th floor of a landmarked building, with a corner window that looked north and west and caught the light in the afternoons in a way she found, each time she sat in front of it, quietly extraordinary. The walls held art she had spent 15 years choosing carefully. The kitchen smelled on Sunday mornings like the café au lait she had learned to make from her grandmother, who had learned it from hers. She kept a small brass key in a glass dish on the entry table. The diamond cut tag was still attached to it, engraved with the safety deposit box number that had changed her life in the way that she most needed it changed, which was not by making her rich because she had been rich before she knew it, but by reminding her, in the precise and practical way that Dolores Vasquez had understood the world, that the things that belong to you cannot be taken if the right people never know you have them. She kept that key visible because she believed, in the way that people who have survived the particular education of a marriage to someone like Marcus Hale come to believe, that it was important to keep physical evidence of the moment when the balance shifted. Not as a trophy, not as a reminder of him, but as a reminder of herself, of the version of herself that had sat at a kitchen table with an old woman who loved her and understood, without being told, that the gift was not the money. The gift was the patience. The gift was the knowledge that her time would come, and that when it came she would be ready, and that being ready was something she had always been, underneath the performance and the dinner parties and the 8 years of smiling at rooms that were laughing at her. She was ready. She had always been ready. She had simply been waiting, the way her grandmother had taught her, for the exact right moment to show it. And on a Tuesday morning in October, in a federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan, while she sat in a sunlit room in Paris holding a cup of café au lait and choosing silk for a collection that would be shown to the most powerful women in global fashion, the moment arrived. It looked like a text from her attorney. It looked like 22 months federal facility sentence begins in 30 days. It looked like the end of something that had already, quietly and thoroughly, been over for a long time. Felt like nothing so much as completion. The silk she chose for her opening look was the color of that feeling, pale and luminous and entirely, utterly her own. Maison Dolores, founded 1971, still standing, and now, for the first time in its 50-year history, with its rightful heir in the chair.